December 1862, Savannah, Georgia. The streets were slick with rain, the cobblestones reflecting the flickering gas lamps, casting long shadows that swayed like restless spirits. The city whispered secrets, and none louder than those hiding behind the high brick walls of the Thornton estate. It was here, amidst polished floors and roaring fireplaces, that a young housemaid named Lydia would begin a story no one could have imagined, one that would unravel the carefully constructed world of wealth, power, and cruelty that had long ruled her life. Lydia was 21, slight, unassuming, her hands worn from years of scrubbing floors, polishing silver, and obeying the orders of a family who considered her invisible. To the Thorntons she was a shadow, a servant, a whisper in the halls, but in the quiet of the night she had seen and remembered everything, every harsh word, every strike of a hand, every humiliation endured in silence. Tonight, however, the house felt different. The master, Edwin Thornton, a man whose temper was as sharp as his cane, had summoned her to the drawing room for reasons unknown. Lydia's heart thumped in her chest, not out of fear exactly, but in recognition. Something was shifting. The air hung thick, scented with pipe smoke, candle wax, and the faint metallic trace of fear. As she entered, Edwin's eyes met hers, cold, calculating. "Lydia," he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge that made her flinch. "I need you to prepare the dining hall. Tonight, there will be guests." He paused, his gaze lingering, as if trying to pierce the smallest thought hiding behind her eyes. Lydia nodded silently. She had learned early that words could be used against you, that silence could be your shield. The dining hall, with its tall windows and heavy velvet drapes, had seen countless feasts, laughter, and cruelty. But tonight, it would witness something entirely different. Lydia moved with practiced precision, lighting candles, setting silverware, polishing the crystal glasses until they caught the firelight like tiny stars. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and yet beneath her calm exterior a storm was gathering. For years, Lydia had endured the Thorntons' cruelty, insults, overwork, even violence disguised as discipline. She had seen friends disappear, sold to other plantations, punished for mistakes they never made. She had learned their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears, and now the pieces were aligning in a way that made her heart both heavy and resolute. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. The streets were quiet save for the distant tolling of a church bell, counting down the hours of another night. Within the walls of the Thornton estate, shadows stretched longer, creeping across the walls as if they were alive, watching Lydia prepare for a night that would change everything. She paused for a moment, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Her reflection in the silver platter caught her eye. Young, small, fragile, but beneath the surface there was something else, a sharpness, a patience, a fire that had been simmering quietly for years. Tonight it would ignite. The guests arrived, neighbors, merchants, and local officials, unaware that the young woman who served them their wine and cleared their plates had a secret no one could suspect. To them, she was just Lydia, the quiet, obedient housemaid. To her, they were the final obstacle in a world that had long refused her justice. Dinner progressed. Conversations hummed. Laughter filled the hall. But Lydia's mind was elsewhere, counting, observing, noting every detail. The angle of Edwin's cane when he gestured, the way he held his glass, the way his guests laughed at his jokes, blind to the cruelty he hid behind polite words. In the kitchen, she prepared for what she had been planning for months. Hidden in the shadows were tools that could shift power in a single decisive moment. But this was not a decision born of anger alone. It was meticulous, calculated, the result of long memory and careful observation. As the grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, Lydia paused. A single thought echoed in her mind. Tonight, nothing would be the same. Every choice she had made, every hidden glance, every whispered conversation, every silent act of endurance, it had led to this moment. The house might be grand, the masters, powerful, but Lydia had patience on her side, and patience, as she knew, could cut deeper than any blade. The clock had just finished tolling 10, its final chime lingering in the grand dining hall like a warning. Lydia moved with quiet efficiency, gliding past the polished oak chairs, her hands steady, her mind sharper than any blade. She had watched this household for years, learning the rhythms of cruelty, the tiny habits that revealed weaknesses no one else could see. Tonight she would test them. Edwin Thornton's laughter boomed across the hall, a deep, controlled sound meant to assert dominance. Around him, the guests mirrored the tone, oblivious to the tension that throbbed beneath the surface of the walls. Lydia poured wine with a hand that didn't tremble, While her eyes flicked constantly to the master's every gesture, it was in those small, seemingly meaningless movements, the way he tapped his cane against the floor, the subtle clench of his jaw, the way his gaze sharpened when he believed he was not being watched, that Lydia saw opportunity. Every man, no matter how powerful, had a rhythm. Every household, no matter how imposing, had cracks. She had memorized them all. Tonight, she would use them. The Thorntons were not just cruel, they were predictable. Edwin, meticulous and vain, obsessed over appearances. His wife, Margaret, was cold and controlling, though less violent. She manipulated the household through fear and subtle humiliation. Their son, Henry, barely 17, had inherited his father's temper but lacked his cunning, making him reckless. And in the wings, the guests played their parts, unaware that a quiet storm was brewing in the very rooms they occupied. Lydia excused herself from the dining hall under the pretense of checking on the kitchen fires. She moved through the corridors like a shadow, listening to the muffled conversations and laughter that she had long learned to interpret. Every word, every pause, every cough could be a clue. The more she listened, the more she realized just how fragile the facade of power really was. In the kitchen, she checked the hidden bundle she had prepared weeks ago. Inside were implements disguised as ordinary kitchen tools, each one selected for a specific purpose. To anyone else, it was just a stack of utensils, knives, and rods. To Lydia, it was her arsenal. She ran her fingers over each handle, feeling the smooth wood and cold steel, knowing each one had a story. Each one could serve justice, but she didn't rush. The art of patience had been drilled into her through years of servitude. Rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes could mean death, either hers or the carefully planned outcome she was orchestrating. She had watched too many people act impulsively, seen the Thorntons' wrath fall on those who moved hastily. Tonight, she would move precisely, deliberately, and with purpose. Back in the dining hall, Edwin leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he noticed the way Lydia's hand lingered on a wine bottle. He dismissed it quickly, assuming she was merely attending to her duties. He didn't know she was observing him as closely as he thought he observed her. He didn't know that the young housemaid had memorized the sound of his breathing, the flicker of his eye, the subtle twitch that betrayed his impatience. Margaret Thornton, seated beside her husband, chatted with a neighbor about a recent shipment of rice and cotton. She gestured with long, gloved fingers, unaware of how easily influence could shift in this household. Lydia made a mental note of her movements, her habits, the places she could manipulate without raising suspicion. Henry Thornton, restless and loud, drew attention with careless jokes and clumsy attempts at charm. He was predictable, too eager to impress, too unaware of the danger looming in the quiet corners of his own house. Lydia smiled faintly to herself, imagining how simple it would be to redirect his impulsive nature at the right moment. As the evening progressed, the guests retired to the parlor for after-dinner drinks. The Thorntons, oblivious to the undercurrents in their own home, remained confident in their superiority. Lydia cleared the dining hall, moving slowly, deliberately, ensuring each piece of silver and crystal was exactly as it should be. It was a dance she had perfected over years of observation, a silent ballet that disguised the storm she was preparing. She paused at the pantry, listening. The muffled voices, the laughter, the sound of boots on polished floors. It all added to the tension that pulsed through the walls. Tonight, she thought the house would remember her, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as someone who could turn patience, memory, and precision into something far more powerful than fear. The night deepened. Candles burned lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the halls. Lydia moved to the side corridor, checking the positions of the doors, the windows, the locks. Everything was as she had anticipated. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint noise from upstairs, every shift of the Thorntons' attention. It all fit into the plan she had been refining for months. In the quiet of the kitchen, she paused once more, glancing at her own reflection in the polished copper pot. She was still young, still slight, still seemingly ordinary, but beneath that appearance, she carried years of memory, of observation, of endurance. The Thorntons had no idea that the very hands they believed powerless could change everything. The first move was always the hardest, she knew, but tonight, the air was thick with anticipation. Every shadow seemed to wait, every heartbeat echoed, like a drum. Lydia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the coming hours settle around her shoulders. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She had studied, waited, and prepared, and now the moment had arrived. The house had grown still. The only sounds were the crackle of the dying embers in the hearth and the occasional clink of glass in the parlor, where the last few guests lingered. Lydia lingered in the shadows of the hallway, her heart steady, her senses alert. Tonight, patience had led her here, to the first move, the first opportunity. Henry Thornton was the easiest to manipulate, reckless, impatient, and drunk on his own sense of invincibility. He fidgeted with a silver cufflink in the parlor, unaware of the quiet eyes watching him from the corridor. Lydia had memorized every detail, the pattern of his gait, the way he laughed at his own jokes, the slight tilt of his head when he was about to raise his voice. She waited for the perfect moment, when he stepped away from the group to retrieve another glass of brandy. She followed silently, her steps perfectly timed, soft against the floorboards. He did not hear her approach. He did not see the shadow detach itself from the wall, and when he turned to speak, she was already beside him, calm, precise, a storm in disguise. The first strike was surgical, not wild, not careless. Lydia used the length of the wooden kitchen rod she had prepared, striking only once, aimed with the precision of years of observation. Henry staggered, caught off balance, confusion etched across his face. His shock was complete. He had never imagined a servant could challenge him. "You, what?" he stammered, reaching for something, anything. But Lydia had anticipated every movement. Her next strike, firm and controlled, sent him sprawling across the polished floor. The parlor erupted into chaos. Guests screamed, some frozen in disbelief, others fumbling to react. But Lydia moved with clarity, with calm. She guided Henry quietly into the hallway, away from the guests, controlling the space with her presence. The house trembled in silence, though no one realized it yet. Lydia's plan relied on this: precision, timing, and the element of surprise. Panic could unravel everything. She had to be perfect. Meanwhile, upstairs, Edwin and Margaret remained oblivious. Their conversation, punctuated with laughter and occasional sharp tones, gave no hint that the balance of power in their household was about to shift. They were confident, arrogant, untouchable, and yet, every detail Lydia had memorized, the pattern of their nightly routines, the layout of the corridors, the placement of the keys, worked in her favor. The second target was less predictable: Edwin Thornton himself. He was cautious, vigilant, and notoriously hard to surprise. Lydia had studied him for months, memorizing every nuance, every subtle tick that betrayed his attention. She knew the moment he would be distracted, the second his confidence faltered. She could act. From the shadows of the staircase, she observed him pacing near the library. His hand rested on the edge of the mantelpiece, his eyes scanning the room, expecting control where none existed anymore. Lydia's breath was steady, her mind sharp. Each heartbeat was deliberate, counting down to the moment when precision would replace fear. She approached quietly, unseen. The weight of the rod in her hand was reassuring. A tool, yes, but also a symbol of endurance, of years of patience, of every injustice endured in silence. She paused, waiting for the fraction of a second when Edwin's gaze would be elsewhere. That moment came as he gestured to Margaret, laughing at a private joke. Lydia struck. The blow was firm, calculated. Edwin stumbled, disbelief written across his face. For the first time in his life, he realized control could be wrested away, but Lydia did not linger. She moved with the same precision, guiding him silently through the corridors, her mind executing a plan that had been rehearsed countless times in thought and memory. Margaret Thornton's reaction was different. She had sensed something amiss, her instinct sharper than Edwin's. When she saw Henry and Edwin vanish from the parlor, she rose, a scream catching in her throat. But Lydia had already anticipated her movements. Using a carefully placed distraction, a knocked-over candlestick and the dimming of the remaining candles, she led Margaret into a side room where her influence was absolute. Each step, each strike, each moment of control was deliberate. Lydia did not move in anger. She moved in precision. She did not hesitate. She had waited for this night for years, and the lessons of patience, observation, and survival were now being executed flawlessly. By the time the household staff realized the gravity of the situation, the Thorntons were already contained, each in a position where Lydia's careful planning gave her control. The house itself, silent and complicit, seemed to bend around her. The corridors she had memorized, the doors she had checked, the hidden spaces she had prepared, all became instruments of her design. And then there was a pause. The house seemed to breathe, caught between the past and the present. Lydia allowed herself a moment to observe, to understand the enormity of what she had set in motion. It was not chaos. It was justice, measured and deliberate. Each movement had been planned, each action weighed, She had turned the tables on cruelty itself as, the night deepened, Lydia moved with renewed purpose. The remaining targets, those still unaware of the shift in power, were next. The house seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the final acts. Shadows stretched long across the walls, candlelight flickering against the polished wood. The quiet intensity of the moment was electric. This was no longer merely survival, it was reclamation. Every suppressed memory, every injustice, every cruel word and act endured over years, found its place in the precision of Lydia's movements. The house, once a prison of fear, had become a stage for reckoning. By the time midnight had passed, the Thorntons' sense of invincibility had evaporated like mist under the morning sun. Lydia moved through the grand house with the quiet authority of a storm about to break. The corridors, once oppressive in their silence, now seemed to whisper encouragement, each creak of the floorboards signaling opportunity rather than danger. Edwin Thornton, confined to the dimly lit library, had begun to comprehend that his wealth and status could not shield him tonight. His hands shook as he tried to steady the candle in front of him. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper of wind a warning. Lydia stepped into the doorway without sound. A shadow detached from the walls. What is this?" Edwin gasped, his voice faltering. The terror in his eyes was raw, unpolished, untempered by denial. Lydia said nothing. Words had always been dangerous. Actions now were decisive. She held the wooden rod like an extension of her will, steady and prepared. With a single, controlled motion, she blocked his path, guiding him to the center of the room. Her precision was impeccable, her timing perfect. Every movement had been rehearsed in her mind countless times. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Edwin tried to resist, lunging to the side, but Lydia's grip was absolute. Every ounce of his arrogance, every habit of command had been anticipated. She struck once, careful, firm, letting the weight of history and grievance carry through. The strike. The room tilted with the force, and Edwin fell backward, dazed, finally sensing that control had shifted. Meanwhile, Margaret Thornton had not remained idle. Panic sharpened her instincts. She ran from the parlor after hearing Henry's startled gasp, her candlelight flickering across her face like a warning signal. But Lydia had prepared for her as well. Every hallway, every turn, every door was mapped in her mind like a battlefield. Margaret moved into a trap of her own making, unknowingly guided by Lydia's careful orchestration. The confrontation was inevitable. Margaret's eyes widened as Lydia emerged from the shadows, her presence undeniable, her gaze unflinching. "Stop," Lydia said softly, but with the weight of years behind the word. Margaret froze, every instinct screaming to run, but the house itself seemed to conspire against her escape. The door behind her creaked as if to remind her that the world had changed. Why are you doing this?" Margaret whispered, trembling. Her voice cracked, the high tone of fear threading through her words. Lydia's answer was simple, yet it carried a weight that no words could fully capture. She did not speak of vengeance, though vengeance simmered quietly beneath the surface. She did not speak of fear, though she had known it intimately for years. She spoke with the authority of truth, of justice long denied. Her silence, her precision, and the careful movements of the past months conveyed everything that words could not. Margaret backed toward the corner of the room, the candlelight flickering across her pale face. Lydia advanced slowly, deliberately, her every step measured. Each heartbeat counted down to the inevitable, each breath held in the space between action and consequence. The past and present merged. The injustices endured over years now found resolution in the present moment. Upstairs, the remaining staff watched from the shadows, hearts pounding. None could intervene, none dared. They had seen Lydia's planning, her patience, her relentless study of the household. They had witnessed her control of the corridors, the doors, the keys, and the movement of those she had already subdued, and they understood that this was more than retribution. This was liberation enacted with precise authority. The final confrontation drew near. Lydia guided Margaret into the center of the room, the wooden rod now a symbol of accumulated strength. Every cruel word, every injustice, every insult and threat Margaret had inflicted in the past hung in the air like ghosts. Lydia's calm was a mirror to the storm she had contained within for years. Tonight, Lydia's voice broke the silence, steady and unwavering. "Everything changes." Margaret's eyes flickered to the hallway, searching for an escape, but none existed. Every route had been anticipated, every possible reaction accounted for. Lydia's patience, meticulous observation, and quiet resolve had brought her to this moment, the unshakable authority over a household that had once held her in chains. And then came the moment that would echo through every corridor, every room, every shadowed corner. Lydia moved with deliberate precision, striking once, twice, measured, not wild. Margaret collapsed, gasping, caught between shock and disbelief. The realization that the power had shifted, that the rules had changed, overwhelmed her. The house was silent now, heavy with the weight of anticipation and fear. Lydia stood among the remnants of chaos, each movement deliberate, controlled. The Thorntons, the cruel architects of her suffering, lay subdued by the consequences of their arrogance. She had orchestrated every moment, every interaction, every opportunity into a symphony of justice. Yet as she paused, a tremor of emotion passed through her. Not relief, not triumph, but a quiet acknowledgement of the cost. The years of endurance, of observing, of calculating, of surviving, had brought her here. The price was high, but the reclamation of power, dignity, and agency was undeniable. Outside, the night pressed in, the world unaware of the transformations unfolding within the walls. The corridors, the doors, the shadows all seemed to breathe with Lydia's presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of candlelight, every whisper of wind through the open windows bore witness to the new order established this night. As she moved through the house, Lydia's mind rehearsed the final steps, the last measures to secure control and ensure that the reckoning would be complete. The Thorntons had underestimated her for years. Tonight they learned that patience, observation, and precision could overturn the deepest hierarchies, the most entrenched power structures. The night was far from over. Lydia had claimed the first victories, but the final acts awaited, and as the candlelight flickered against her determined gaze, she understood that the true reckoning, the moment when all would be accounted for, was yet to come. The night pressed on, thick with tension, each second stretching like a rope pulled tight. Lydia moved silently through the Thorntons' grand hallways, her senses sharpened, every sound amplified. Upstairs, in the guest rooms, faint whispers of servants hiding behind closed doors reminded her that she was not alone, but neither were they in control. Henry Thornton, the youngest, had not yet been confronted. Brash, impulsive, and reckless, he thought his youthful energy could shield him. But Lydia had learned every habit, every weakness. She understood how fear, carefully measured, could immobilize even the most reckless. Henry moved toward the staircase, unaware that every step he took had already been anticipated. A candle flickered in his hand, casting shadows that danced across the walls, unknowingly revealing the path Lydia had memorized. Her hand rested on the polished wood of the railing, steady as stone. She waited, her patience absolute. Henry. Her voice broke the silence like a soft crack of thunder. The young man froze, his eyes wide, searching for the source. "It's too late," Lydia said simply, her calm contrasting sharply with the panic rising in his chest. Henry's first instinct was to run, but the layout had been calculated, every exit accounted for. He stumbled back, candle trembling in his hand, realizing that the house itself had become a trap. Lydia advanced, each step deliberate, her gaze unflinching, her authority undeniable. "You don't understand," Henry stammered, trying to regain composure. This isn't..." But Lydia interrupted silently, her presence alone sufficient to command compliance. Every insult, every humiliation Henry had inflicted over the years hovered in the air like ghosts. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, each one a lesson in precision and inevitability. The first strike was symbolic, not impulsive, a measured confrontation that communicated dominance without haste. Henry stumbled, the reality of his vulnerability crashing over him like a wave. His confidence, built over years of privilege and arrogance, evaporated in the dim candlelight. Meanwhile, Lydia's mind raced, recalling every instance of cruelty, every slight, every act of control the Thorntons had wielded. This wasn't mere revenge, it was the reclamation of power stolen from her and countless others over years. Every blow, every maneuver was carefully considered, ensuring that the lesson would resonate long after the night ended. As Henry fell into disarray, Lydia's attention shifted to securing the rest of the household. The servants, previously trapped in shadows and fear, began to sense the shift in control. Some dared to peek from corners, eyes wide, hearts pounding. Lydia's authority was now unmistakable. She had transformed the house into a stage where the consequences of cruelty were about to unfold. The final act of the evening required precision. Lydia knew she had to maintain control, lest chaos undo her careful orchestration. She moved Henry to the center of the main hall, her every motion commanding attention and respect. The house itself seemed to acknowledge the change, as if the walls, the floors, and the shadows had been waiting for this moment of reckoning. Tonight, Lydia's voice was calm, measured, yet charged with authority. "You will understand what it means to wield power over others without conscience." Henry's attempts at defiance crumbled under the weight of her presence. Each gesture, each word, each movement of Lydia's was deliberate, a silent declaration that the hierarchy had shifted. No longer was fear used against her. It was her tool, measured and precise, used to reveal truth and ensure accountability. Meanwhile, the other servants began to emerge from hiding, emboldened by Lydia's presence. Their eyes, once filled with fear, now reflected cautious hope. They understood in that moment that Lydia's actions were not born from malice but from the necessity of survival and justice long denied. The final moments approached. Lydia's movements, previously rehearsed in the corridors of her mind, flowed seamlessly into reality. Every step, every action, every calculated gesture culminated in a scene of undeniable authority. The Thorntons, once untouchable in their arrogance, were now fully subjected to the consequences of their cruelty. And then, as the first rays of dawn began to creep through the tall windows, Lydia paused. She surveyed the aftermath. Every room, every hallway, every shadow had borne witness. The house, once a symbol of oppression and control, now echoed with a new order, one born not from fear, but from the patient, calculated assertion of justice. The Thorntons were broken, humbled, their power dismantled piece by piece. Lydia's calm was absolute, her eyes steady. She had completed what she had meticulously planned, yet her mind remained vigilant. The night had tested her endurance, her resolve, and her courage. She had triumphed, not through brute force alone, but through foresight, intelligence, and unwavering patience. Outside, the first morning birds stirred. The world continued unaware of the transformation that had occurred behind the walls. Lydia, standing amidst the results of her careful orchestration, felt the quiet satisfaction of a long-awaited balance restored. Her actions had been decisive, measured, and purposeful. The house, now silent but for the soft rustle of curtains and the faint creak of floorboards, held its breath. Lydia knew that her reckoning had been complete, yet she remained aware of the delicate tension that persisted. Power, once seized, demanded vigilance. Justice, once exacted, required awareness. And she, Lydia of Savannah, had both in abundance. She stepped into the main hall, her figure illuminated by the growing light. Every shadow receded at her approach. The servants emerged fully now, faces pale but inspired, witnessing the culmination of a careful plan that had spanned months. Lydia had rewritten the rules of the household, and the lesson was etched permanently in every corner, every surface, and every eye that bore witness. The final act of control was hers alone, yet its impact would ripple beyond the house, beyond Savannah, beyond memory. She had turned the table, and history, with all its cruelty and injustice, would remember her resolve. The first light of morning seeped slowly into the Thorntons' mansion, brushing the walls with pale gold. The grandeur of the house, once oppressive and domineering, now seemed hollow, its opulence a silent witness to the upheaval of the night. Lydia moved through the corridors with deliberate calm, every step measured, every breath steady. She was no longer just a housemaid. She was the architect of justice, the one who had rewritten the rules of the household. The aftermath was quiet, but profound. Broken furniture, scattered personal effects, and the stillness of those who had wielded power so recklessly, all of it testified to the night's events. Lydia paused by the grand staircase, taking in the sight, allowing herself a moment to absorb the magnitude of what she had accomplished. The fear that had once held her in chains had been transformed into authority. The terror the Thorntons had inflicted for years had been mirrored back to them, precisely and without hesitation. The servants, emerging now fully from their hiding places, glanced at Lydia with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and cautious hope. She had shown them that courage could exist even in the face of centuries of oppression, that cleverness and patience could overturn the most entrenched power structures. Their eyes, wide with disbelief, followed her as she walked through the hallways, touching objects, observing details, acknowledging the lives that had intersected within these walls. Lydia's mind, however, was not at peace. Victory had come at a cost. Not in physical harm, but in emotional weight. The memories of cruelty, of whispered threats, of long nights spent under the watchful eyes of the Thornton family were indelibly etched in her mind. Each room, each corner, each shadow carried echoes of past suffering and the heavy responsibility of justice enacted. She paused in the dining hall where the remnants of the previous night still lingered. Overturned chairs, shattered glasses, and the faint scent of candle wax mixed with the coppery tang of fear. Lydia closed her eyes, letting the silence wash over her. For a moment she allowed herself to feel the enormity of her actions, the courage it had taken, the meticulous planning, the restraint, and the precision. She had taken control when none had dared, and in doing so, she had altered the course of countless lives. Yet Lydia also knew that the world beyond these walls remained unchanged. Savannah, bustling and unaware, continued its daily rhythm. The injustices she had fought against were not eradicated by one night, nor by one act of bravery, but within the Thorntons' mansion a precedent had been set, a silent warning that cruelty could meet its equal. The scales of justice, long unbalanced, had shifted, even if just slightly. Outside, the early morning mist curled around the edges of the estate. Lydia stepped onto the veranda, the cool air a sharp contrast to the heat and tension of the night. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the house lift slightly from her shoulders. The world seemed different now, not because it had changed, but because she had seized the moment, transformed fear into strategy, and enacted a long-awaited reckoning. A distant rooster crowed, birds began to stir, and Savannah slowly awakened. Lydia's gaze lingered on the horizon, contemplating the path ahead. Freedom, she realized, was not merely the absence of chains, but the courage to confront injustice, the foresight to plan, and the patience to act with precision. The lessons of the night would remain with her, guiding every step she took from this day forward. In the quiet aftermath, Lydia also thought of those who had inspired her resilience, the other servants, the oppressed, the forgotten. She had acted not solely for herself but for every person who had been silenced, beaten, or ignored. The night had been a testament to endurance, to intelligence, and to the unwavering pursuit of justice. The Thorntons, once untouchable in their arrogance, were now humbled and broken. Lydia had proven that power, when wielded without conscience, could be countered, even by someone they had considered insignificant. The mansion, its corridors and rooms, would forever carry the imprint of her actions, a story written not in ink, but in courage, precision, and resolve. As the sun climbed higher, Lydia began to organize the house, ensuring that the servants could reclaim spaces that had long been dominated by fear. She offered quiet reassurance, steady guidance, and practical instructions, demonstrating that leadership was not about tyranny, but about responsibility, care, and vision. By midday, the estate was transformed, not only by the events of the night, but by the subtle shift in energy. The servants moved with newfound confidence, the house felt lighter, and Lydia herself carried an inner strength forged in the crucible of confrontation. She knew that Savannah's history was not easily rewritten, but within these walls a narrative of justice, courage, and reclamation had been inscribed for all who would remember. Lydia paused one last time in the main hall, her eyes scanning the details, the furniture, the floors, the shadows, the faces of those who had survived alongside her. She allowed herself a quiet moment of triumph, tempered by reflection. This night, she realized, was more than an act of vengeance. It was a reclaiming of dignity, an assertion that even in the harshest conditions, courage, strategy, and moral clarity could prevail. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon again. Savannah waited unaware for the story that would eventually ripple beyond its streets. Lydia knew she had altered the course of this household forever, and in doing so, had forged a legacy of resilience, cunning, and moral courage that could not be erased. The day was just beginning, but Lydia of Savannah had already changed history. By late afternoon, the events of the night had begun to seep into Savannah's streets, carried by whispers, cautious glances, and rumors that spread faster than wildfire. Lydia of Savannah, once merely a housemaid, had become a figure both feared and revered. No one outside the mansion walls yet knew the full story. Some imagined horrors, others miracles, but all recognized that something extraordinary had occurred. Lydia moved through the estate with a purposeful calm. The air still carried the faint metallic tang of blood, a reminder of the reckoning she had delivered, but she had little time to dwell on the past. Plans for the future, for safety, for freedom, not just for herself but for those who had endured under the Thorntons' cruelty, demanded attention. Every movement, every word, every glance mattered. She had to act wisely. The servants, sensing the shift in power, looked to her for guidance. For years they had endured fear and obedience, but now, through one act of courage, the rules had changed. Lydia understood the responsibility that came with this transformation. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a symbol, a strategist, a guide for those who had been silenced. She spoke softly, offering instructions, reassurance, and strategy. Her words carried weight because she had earned it, not through threat, but through action and intelligence. Outside the mansion, Savannah itself remained largely unaware. A city bustling with commerce, children running through streets, merchants calling out their wares, oblivious to the quiet upheaval on one estate. But the ripples of Lydia's actions would soon spread. Stories would circulate in whispers in kitchens, on porches, and through the quarters where the enslaved and oppressed made their homes. Each retelling would grow, shaping a legend that could not be ignored. Lydia paused near the veranda, gazing at the distant horizon where the sun now dipped low, casting long shadows across the estate. She reflected on the night that had passed, the meticulous planning, the courage it had demanded, the precision with which justice had been executed. She thought of the Thorntons, once so certain of their dominance, now reduced to memories of arrogance and cruelty. The weight of their power, once oppressive, had been transformed into silence. A silence Lydia carried forward with both reverence and caution. Yet even as victory lingered, a new layer of tension emerged. Savannah was a city steeped in secrets, alliances, and hidden threats. Lydia knew that the Thorntons' influence did not vanish overnight. Allies, friends, and distant family members could seek revenge. The justice she had delivered was immediate, but the consequences, ripple effects, across the city, across families, across centuries of entrenched power, were unpredictable. She needed foresight, cunning, and careful steps to navigate the aftermath. In quiet moments, Lydia revisited her memories, the cruelty, the stolen lives, the whispered promises of freedom never fulfilled. Every injustice she had witnessed fueled her resolve, each detail sharpening her instincts. She had acted not in blind rage, but with strategy, precision, and moral clarity. The events of the mansion were not just personal revenge, they were a declaration, a statement that even those deemed powerless could alter history with courage and intelligence. As the evening settled, Lydia gathered the remaining servants in the main hall. She spoke in measured tones, recounting what had occurred, emphasizing the importance of discretion and careful conduct. Every instruction was a layer of protection, every word a shield. The house was still theirs now, but vigilance was necessary. Savannah was full of eyes and ears, of gossip, of judgment. Lydia understood that while one night could alter the balance of power within walls, the outside world required a different kind of strategy. She paused frequently, allowing questions, nods, and murmurs to shape the conversation. Subtle cues encouraged participation, engagement, and shared responsibility. Lydia was not simply giving orders, she was creating a sense of shared agency, a recognition that courage and prudence must coexist. She emphasized preparation, observation, and moral vigilance, reminding all present that survival and justice were entwined. Later, as night fell once more over Savannah, Lydia found a quiet corner on the veranda. The air was cool, the city's distant sounds muted, and the stars overhead sharp and cold. She reflected on what had been accomplished, on the lives shifted, on the courage awakened in herself and others. There was a strange serenity in knowing that history could be altered by intelligence, courage, and careful planning, even in the face of cruelty. But even in that calm, a shadow of tension remained. Lydia's story, though contained within these walls for now, would inevitably attract attention. Savannah was a city of curiosity, of secrets, and of those who would seek to control, punish, or exploit. The legend of Lydia, the housemaid who had turned the tables, was only beginning. And as the stars glimmered overhead, she considered the stories yet untold, the secrets of those who had suffered quietly, the mysteries of who might rise and who might fall, and the subtle lessons of courage, strategy, and moral reckoning that could shape generations to come. Lydia knew that her journey was far from over, that the night's actions were but a beginning, and that the true test of her ingenuity and resilience had only just begun. She paused, eyes lifting to the horizon, to the audience, if they could see her. The unspoken question hung in the air. What would you do if faced with cruelty, injustice, and the power to act? Would you seize the moment, or let it slip? Savannah, history, and the echoes of the past waited for answers. And Lydia, calm, resolute, and unbroken, stood ready to guide them. Night had fully descended over Savannah. The streets were quiet, the distant lanterns casting pools of light over cobblestones slick with evening dew. Inside the mansion, a different kind of silence prevailed, a heavy, deliberate stillness charged with the echoes of the past. Lydia moved carefully through the rooms, her presence almost ethereal, a figure both grounded and extraordinary. The events of that fateful night, when courage met justice, had forever altered the balance within these walls. Yet Lydia knew the weight of history did not vanish with a single act. Power, cruelty, and greed lingered in the shadows, in the city's whispers, in the hearts of men who had long believed themselves untouchable. Every step she took, every decision she made would ripple far beyond the mansion. Lydia paused near the grand staircase, reflecting on the faces of the Thorntons, their arrogance, their cruelty, their dismissal of lives they considered lesser. Each act of oppression she had witnessed had been seared into her memory, shaping the woman she had become, patient, strategic, and unwavering in the pursuit of justice. She realized that revenge had been only part of the equation. What truly mattered was ensuring that justice endured, that lessons were remembered, that courage became contagious. The servants, once silent shadows, now moved with quiet confidence. They had seen courage embodied, and in that example they had found strength. Lydia spoke to them, her voice steady, firm, yet infused with warmth. She instructed, guided, and inspired, making sure they understood that survival and moral clarity must go hand in hand. Every whispered strategy, every careful step, reinforced a new reality. The powerless could influence history when they acted with intelligence, precision, and courage. Outside, the city of Savannah remained largely unaware of the monumental shift within the Thorntons' mansion. Merchants called out their wares, children's laughter echoed through alleyways, and lanterns swayed in the cool night breeze. The city, bustling and unaware, would eventually hear the story, through whispers, through letters, through tales, told by those who had witnessed bravery in the face of unthinkable cruelty. Lydia, standing on the veranda, considered the broader implications of her actions. History was not merely a chronicle of kings and generals, of wealth and conquest. It was also the sum of quiet, deliberate acts, the courage of those who refused to accept injustice, and the choices made in moments of moral clarity. Every swing of the axe, every measured step had rewritten her story, and in doing so offered a blueprint for others who might one day confront cruelty and oppression. She thought of Isaiah, of the innocents lost, of the countless lives marked by silence and fear. Her heart bore the weight of grief and remembrance, but also a strange, fierce hope. The Thorntons' dominance had ended within these walls, but their legacy of fear and oppression would not survive her story. Lydia understood that survival required vigilance, foresight, and compassion. The mansion had become a symbol, a testament to the power of strategy and courage, to the possibility of justice when wielded wisely. As the hours passed, Lydia moved to the quiet corners of the estate, observing the subtle signs of life resuming. The servants whispered among themselves, sharing small victories, stories of endurance and reflections on what had been accomplished. These murmurs of resilience would carry forward, growing louder over time, forming a legacy that could not be silenced. For Lydia herself, the journey was far from over. The night's actions were only the beginning. She knew that Savannah, with its secrets, allegiances, and hidden dangers, would continue to challenge her, but she had discovered within herself a power greater than fear, the ability to act with courage, clarity, and purpose, and that, she realized, was the true measure of freedom. To the audience, if you could hear her thoughts, the question was clear. When faced with cruelty, injustice, and the opportunity to act, what choice would you make? Would you remain silent, or would you seize the moment no matter the cost? Lydia's story was a reminder that courage, intelligence, and moral resolve could rewrite history, not just for oneself, but for countless others who had been silenced. In the final moments of that night, Lydia stood on the veranda, gazing at the horizon. The first light of dawn touched the city, painting the streets with gold and pink hues. Savannah would awaken unaware of the transformation that had occurred, but the story, carried in whispers and memory, would endure. Lydia's courage had not only changed the mansion, but had sown seeds for generations to come, a testament to resilience, justice, and the indomitable human spirit. And so, as the city stirred and the first birds sang, Lydia of Savannah became more than a housemaid. She became legend. She became a reminder that even in the darkest corners of history, light, born of courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve, could shine. If Lydia's story moved you, inspired thought, or stirred reflection, consider sharing it. Comment below your thoughts, your questions, and your reflections on courage and justice. Subscribe to the channel to uncover more stories of hidden history, unspoken truths, and the remarkable acts of ordinary people who defied expectation and changed the course of their world. Because history is not only what happened, it's what we choose to remember, honor, and learn from. And Lydia's story, etched into the legacy of Savannah, will never be forgotten.